Everybody, myself included, talks about NVIDIA. But what about Broadcom, who reports earnings this Thursday? What's in store for them as they continue to make all-time highs? Find out today in this video.
All right, so let's flip the hat back and let's get into Broadcom to see what's up for their earnings. All right, so here we go. Here is Broadcom on the daily chart. And you can see that of the time I'm recording this here, it is Tuesday, June 3rd. We have made new all-time highs. Let's go ahead and mark this out here. And that price point is going to be 258.04. And you can see that that has eclipsed the previous all-time high that was made back in December of 2024. And this thing has been on quite a push. And if we just go back and look, it was impacted by the sell-off, the tariff tumble, and it got down to a low of 138.06. And it made that low on April 7th when really the market made its bottom. And if we go ahead and measure that out in terms of how far it dropped, that was about a 45% dip, which is $113.32. And that's quite significant because in order to find price points where it hit that 130.38 mark, we'd have to go back to September 9th, which we had a pretty big drop there. And we'd have to go back to the flash crash of August of last year, 2024, to find where we were lower than that price area. So that was a pretty significant dip. But what is really impressive is how buyers stepped in at that price level and just jammed this thing back up. And if we look at this, I do see two patterns that stand out here. I'm sure you guys are seeing these as well. But we do have an inverted head and shoulders here, which has since broke out above that neckline. We are up near all-time highs. Well, actually made an all-time high. But you can also see too, off of this low, we do have a lower low, higher low double bottom, which we then blasted through all of those moving averages to get to the price area where we are now. Chart brings up some bad memories because I actually got into a position on Broadcom right around this area when we were by the 50 on the daily. Maybe it was a little bit lower. Maybe it was actually down here. And I didn't stay in it for very long. I haven't been swing trading. I made a tiny little profit off of a day trade, but I sit here and look at this and think, man, what a coward you were to not stick tight to this and ride out that move, because I would be celebrating right now with this push. But why you came here today is because let's talk about what potentially can happen on earnings, because that's coming here on Thursday, June 5th. And then we can see that the earnings estimate 1.569, the revenue 14.96 billion. And we can see here that the earnings are coming here on June 5th. And just from a technical perspective, let's take a look at what happened the last few earnings reports. And we can see that this most recent earnings on March 6th, this was when everything was pretty weak. So there's not going to be a lot to be gleaned from this, but they reported after. And you did get a little bit of a bounce here on Broadcom, but that didn't hold. And then it just kind of moved sideways before it bottomed out on that drop off of the tariff weakness. And so that was really a nothing burger for their March report. If we go back to their report in January, if we go back to their report in December, we could see that it had a massive move here. And we were above all of the moving averages with the candle close here. That's a hammerish candle that we had come in here on Thursday, December 12th. And then what proceeded to happen from here is we had, if we measure this to the high of that upper wick, we had a $47.88 move, a 26.47% push higher off of earnings. And look at that gap that it left behind, which has since filled, interestingly enough. So it had a massive move there on its December report. if we just keep going backwards, we could see here, this was their September report. Again, the market was pretty weak at that point. There was concerns around inflation, the labor market. This was following the flash crash too, when there was a lot of panic in the market. And what happened here, we gapped down, we found support on that 200 simple moving average on the daily, and then pushed out. Coming back to the previous one, if we go to last June, what happened here? We were in an uptrend. After some sideways movement here, it was pushing up for about 5 days. And then what happened? It had another gap up. And let's measure this out to see how far this went to the upper part of that wick. That was a $24.48 move, 16.40%. So that was a nice gap up. And we got to a high there of 173.71. If we just keep going backwards here, we could see that the March report here was a gap down, and then December of 2023, it did have a push higher. So if we're just doing sheer probabilities and account of how this thing moved here, the last few earnings report, in March, we did have a push up, but really it was a nothing burger. December was a massive gap up, move higher. And in September, it was a gap down. So nothing burger, gap up, gap down. So really, this thing could go either way. We could gap up, we could gap down. It's really a crapshoot. And remember that with earnings, you could have the best earnings report possible and still get crushed and punished by market makers. So we have to be careful in how we play this. And it's better to wait until the earnings report is finished and then that following day, go ahead and trade it. But if we just look at this from a technical perspective right now, we can see that this inverted head and shoulders has played out. We've made all-time highs. If we look down here on the RSI, you can see that we are overbought. We're significantly overbought. But interestingly enough, we are not as high on the RSI as we were back in December when this thing just flew. So a lot of people will look at this chart and say, well, it's already too far extended. It can't move that hard. But remember, stocks are irrational and they could do crazy things. So could it gap up and go even further, even harder, even faster? Absolutely. We just don't know. If we look at it from this perspective, from December really through February, it moved sideways. Then we got that correction, and we have since have got bought and back up by the bulls here, and we moved within this range from December through February, and we have now just broken out of it. So there is potential for this to bust higher on its report. And if it does happen to gap down, we can see that there is quite a bit of support below us to keep it from having a free fall, right? We could see that, sure, it could have a pretty precipitous drop, but you do have that 100 SMA at $206 that would act as some support. You have this point of control here at 230.47, and then just a glut of simple moving averages down below that would keep this from falling off of a cliff. And so can it gap down? Yes. Can it gap up? Yes. And what would we be looking for if we get a significant move? Because more than likely, whatever type of move we get here on Broadcom, it's going to be large, probably $20 to $25. And so that's my estimate for where we're going to move. So let's just mark out $25 from this upper wick here. So we're going to put that right at that point of control as a potential bearish target. So 232.30 will be target one. And then what I'm going to be looking at after that will be that 100 SMA on the daily here. And what I'd be looking for on a bullish move higher, let's say our bullish target, again, a $25 move higher. This is about a 10% move either way, but I'm going to mark this out at 282.03. But I will say this. If the report is very, very strong, if their forward guidance is very, very strong, I can see this thing hitting 300, but this is going to be my initial price target. There is a bullish move on Broadcom. And again, the momentum is there. And remember, Tickers can be irrational in how they move, and just because it's moved significantly, just because it's overbought, doesn't mean that it can't do that. And just a review here, if we get a bearish move to the downside here on Broadcom, I'm looking at that 232.30 as the first target. If it comes down lower than that, I'm looking at that 100 simple moving average on the daily to be its saving grace. If we happen to gap up, I'm looking at 282.03 as my first target, with the uppermost target being that $300 even area, because this thing has been showing lots of strength here recently. Take a look at the weekly chart here, and we could see, again, just strength in these candles. We did break above the selling pressure that came in on these two weekly candles here, the week of May 12th, the week of May 19th. We closed above those very strongly. We closed above this large wick from the 16th of December, the week of 16th of December. And again, just showing how the bulls are in charge. And if we go over to the monthly, we could see that we had a strong candle in May. Everything had a strong candle in May, but we're continuing that trend in June. And really, things look like they are set up for a continuation to the upside. However, there are things out there like tariffs, like tweets, trade wars, geopolitical issues that can send things down in an instant. So we have to be careful. We have to be cautious.
There you go. My take on Broadcom, AVGO. This thing has been a monster here of late, and it can continue to do that. Remember, there's the concept of irrationality in the market. Just because something is overbought and it's pushing higher and higher and higher doesn't mean that it has to cool off anytime soon. See Palantir last year. See Nvidia in the early part of 2024. Now, that doesn't mean that this thing is just automatically going to zoom to the moon. It doesn't mean that, because there still is potential for it to drop. But it means that don't just bet against this thing because it is overextended on the charts. The best way to play this, wait for the move to come to fruition after earnings, let it settle out, and then day trade the snot out of it. But if I'm making an educated guess here, there's a lot of momentum. I do think Broadcom is going to go a little higher off of earnings. What are your thoughts? Comment down below what you think is going to happen with Broadcom off of earnings, and let me know a ticker that you'd like to see me analyze. I will put that together for you. Smash that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.